Hi, welcome to Introspection with Jeff. I'm Samantha, and I'm so excited to tell you about an interesting theory I discovered in 2012. It deals with screenwriting, and I've been I've been so eager. I try to explain this to people, this theory, and there's nothing really complicated about it. Um, I figured I would just make a video instead of explaining it over and over again. Um, Let me tell you first, it was developed by two people in college, and it was developed, I think 1992, something like that. And they decided not to, they were filmmakers, and they decided not to read pretty much any, I guess they had read some books about screenwriting, but they consciously made an effort not to read a lot about screenwriting. Um, so they took a more psychological approach. And what's fascinating is that I discovered this on a blog. I borrowed a film and watched it for the first time, and I knew that it matched the film it kind of matched the themes that I wanted to write in mine. So I was looking online, and I discovered this blog maintained by one of the practitioners, one of the people who had sat in on the analysis sessions, and he would write this. He would apply the theory. It's an actual theory. It's not just a computer software. It's an actual theory, and he would apply that methodology. He would apply those aspects of the theory to films. And he had this blog, and I discovered the blog. And let me explain it. All right. There are several components. First of all, it's a computer program that you use to apply the theory, but you can some of the basics, a lot of the basics, you can understand without even looking at the program. It works in fours. It works actually based on the idea of a quad. That may get a little complicated, so I may or may not explain that to you yet. Let me start off with describing the basics. Many of you have seen Star Wars, I hope. There are four different perspectives in any story, any well-written story. There are four different perspectives, and if you watch movies, you'll see these perspectives pretty clearly. Some of it may have been subconscious. Well, anyway, let me get into it. There's the main character perspective, which would be the I perspective, meaning you yourself, we as the audience share the I perspective. And then there's the you perspective, which is this other person, not the antagonist, but someone who represents an alternative point of view. And I'll get to that soon. I'll get to that now. The main character comes in and has a certain point of view, so has a certain approach to dealing with his or her problems. And this other character, the obstacle character, or I can't remember what other word they used. Well, anyway, it's changed. I'll call it the obstacle character. Represents this alternative point of view. So it's a quad. So there are these two perspectives, plus they have a relationship, and there are other relationships amongst characters. That's a third perspective. That's more the emotional heart perspective. And then there's the overall objective perspective, like what they called the chess perspective. All the characters objectively seen. So let's look at Star Wars for a moment. So in Star Wars, the overall objective, what the story is about, is the Empire versus the Rebellion, right? That's what all the characters are involved with. That's what they're all concerned about. Now, Luke Skywalker, I think we can all agree, Luke Skywalker is our main character. We experience the movie through his eyes. And then Ben Kenobi is this other character, and he's a very good obstacle character because if you've seen the movie, he keeps telling Luke, trust the Force, trust your instinct. And Luke, it takes a long time for Luke to actually understand. Although he wants to become a Jedi, he has to learn to trust himself, trust in yourself, trust your instincts. That's why at the end of the movie, spoiler alert for a movie that's was it 60 years old, 50 years old, something like that. Luke Skywalker listens to Ben Kenobi say, "Use the Force, Luke," and he turns off his computer. The computer tracking system goes away, and he just basically closes his eyes and trusts his instincts and destroys the Death Star. So now he's our main character in the story. Ben Kenobi is the obstacle character, and there are several relationships. I'm not sure if R2-D2 and C-3PO have a relationship that would be in part of the relationship perspective, but certainly Luke Skywalker and Ben Kenobi have a relationship. And that's the heart of the story. So some rules, as I said before, it works in quads. 2 diagonal elements and 2 diagonal elements over here. Now, the obstacle character, for certain reasons, the obstacle character and the main character must have diagonal positions in this quad when you're assigning what goes where. And the same thing goes for the objective storyline, the objective perspective, and the subjective perspective. They too must have diagonal perspectives. Now, let me see. Now, let me get into the main character traits. The main character can either be a beer or a doer. A beer prefers to deal with his emotion, deal with conflict by altering himself, adjusting himself to fit the circumstances around him. Ghostbusters, Peter, the character of Peter, is a very good beer. At first I thought he was a doer because he seems so active, but actually when you look at him as a beer, he's very manipulative. He changes what he says to match what he wants the girl to what he thinks the girl expects him to say. For example, in that opening scene, we're introduced to Peter, and he's trying to hit on this co-ed, right? And so he offers, "Hey, gee, I'd like to meet you, again, to do more of this testing, right? Right? Wink, wink." And she says something like, "How about 8 o'clock?" So instantly he says, "I was just about to say 8 o'clock." That's a very beer moment. That's a moment when he tries to make himself changed to match something that would appeal to her. Oh, and then later on, when he knocks on the door and who I can't remember. Dana opens the door and she's possessed at this point, and she says, "Are you the keymaster?" And he says, "No," and the door shuts. He knocks again, and she asks, "Are you the keymaster?" And he changes what he says, and he says, "Yes," and she lets him right in. That's an example of him adjusting himself, or adjusting what he says to match what he expects she wants. So that's one aspect. There in the computer program, when you open it up, there are 4 aspects for the main character and 4 aspects of the objective story. Let me see. That's doer or beer. Doer is more common, especially in Western films. A doer prefers to change the outside world. He'll fight, he'll struggle against, it's like he's pushing against this outer world. And the beer character changes himself. A lot of drinkers in movies, you'll see, will be beers. They're getting themselves drunk. They're adjusting their emotional, they're changing themselves. So, doer, beer. And then there's linear or holistic. Now, this is my favorite because the 2 founders of the theory, one of them was undergoing a sex change operation. And she had some insight from experience. And I'll explain it there's a lot to it, but I'll explain it quickly. A linear character. Batman is a very good example of a linear character. A linear character goes about solving problems, goes about figuring out the world, point by point by point. It's very linear. It goes from segment to segment and to segment. And if there's something outside, if there's something that can't logically follow, logically in a male sense of rational, he can't understand it. Another good example, in the movie The Dark Knight, they did an analysis of it, and Batman / Bruce Wayne is a good example of a linear character. And the Joker is an excellent example of a holistic character. Holistic character, they've gone through the terminology has really changed. A holistic character, the Joker, for example, will try to rearrange. It's more spatially oriented. We'll try and rearrange the spatial relationships. Basically rearrange relationships between things or between people to get an end result. Whereas a linear thinker would think, if I do this, if I do this, this will result. If I don't do this, this will result. As opposed to as I said before, as opposed to a holistic thinker, which thinks spatially. If I adjust this over here, that'll send ripple effects and change the whole world, the whole environment, right? And change this over here and get the result that I want. So, at some point, I think they started off calling it male and female, male being linear and female being holistic. But it doesn't go well amongst people, because they get the wrong idea, and So they changed it to, I can't remember what they changed it to. When I got the software, I started studying it. They had already gotten past that middle step, and they had gotten to linear and holistic. Um, so there's doer beer. There. Change. Oh, this is very easy. Now both characters, both the our perspective character, the main character, and the objective, the obstacle character, have general approaches to how to deal with problems. They both have problem. They both have a solution. They both have what they think is the problem, or kind of the symptom. That they can deal with the symptoms, but sometimes they can't deal with the problem. So anyway, so Luke Skywalker has this problem, and he's definitely a doer. He doesn't rearrange things to match. But Ben Kenobi is more like a beer, very much more like a beer. He says, trust the Force. In some ways, if you look through, you'll find ways in which he'll adjust himself, I believe. Anyway, usually, well, according to the theory, because they're in diagonal positions on the map, on the quad, they have to be different in their approach. Luke Skywalker is very much a doer, and his problem is that I think I'm jumping ahead of myself. Okay, so you have doer and beer. You have change, right. The main character is faced with a problem, personal problem. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with the outside, so this nothing to do with the rebels nor the Empire. He has his own personal problem. He's in the shadow of his father that he never met. He wishes he met. He learns that his father had been a very talented Jedi. He's stuck on this planet when he wants to go out into space and seek adventure. And he's just plain stuck. His uncle, he asks his uncle, can I go? I want to go to the academy, the space academy. And his uncle says something I think he's heard before. Well, I need you on the farm, something about this coming season and maybe next year. And I even got the impression that he's heard this quite a few times. Maybe next year. So he gets up from the table, and his uncle says, where are you going? And he says, looks like I'm going nowhere. And he walks out, and he goes outside, and he looks out at those two, I don't know if they're suns or moons, but those two bright lights in the sky, and music starts playing, and he thinks, we can all assume he thinks, if only, I want to be out there, and I'm stuck on this planet, and I may never get out. So that's his problem. And so over time, he, under the influence of this obstacle character, that's it. The other term for the obstacle character, is an influence character. And I can see both terms being applied, but I kind of like influence character because, the influence character has this influence on the main character, us. Now, at the end of the story, in the climax, the main character has a choice. just like Luke Skywalker at the end, trust the Force, use the Force, Luke. He has a choice whether to go with what he's used before, doing and testing. His problem is he tests himself, and he could keep testing himself or testing the situation, or he can trust the Force, and that's exactly in this diagram. Dramatica has this periodic, essentially what's called a periodic table, and you can identify the precise problem is trust versus test, and so he decides to change. This doesn't have anything to do with the outside world. This is go about his problems by testing, or go about his problems by trusting in himself. And he decides to trust himself. He shuts off his computer and he trusts himself and uses his instincts, and boom. He not only does he see that he can solve his problems by trusting himself instead of testing, but as the protagonist, he solves the overall objective story of the Empire versus the rebels. So he can the main character can either change and adapt the viewpoint of the influence character, or if he'll start off steadfast. I think all characters at the beginning start off steadfast, right? You think, no, the influence character is wrong. I'm right. I know how to deal with my problems. I've been dealing with them for like 40 years, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know my problems. So that's a steadfast character. And they're treated in two different ways. Over the course of the movie, course of the story, a steadfast character, when confronted with conflict, right, will shore up his resolve. He'll keep using his same approach. And at the very climax, he'll use that same. He'll have a choice. Same way as the change, what I described before with the change character. He'll have a choice. He'll either go with the change, go with the obstacle, the way the influence character does things, or he'll go with what he's always used. And the steadfast character will use the approach he's always used. And he could win in victory, or I shouldn't say victory, because that's merging his personal through line, each of those, the objective story, the subjective story, the main character, and the influence character, the obstacle character, each have arcs, or like storylines. So if you're watching the story go from beginning to end, over the course of the story, there'll be 4 arcs simultaneously. Those 4 perspectives, and that's why you in relationship in movies in general, you'll see some kind of relationship. Usually, it'll be like a romantic relationship, or 2 buddies forming a relationship. That has nothing to do with the objective story, right? Like, say for example, you have like 2 cops and they're opposites, and they're trying to catch a crook. So catching the crook is the objective story. They're the protagonists in the story, both of them, and the crook is probably the antagonist. However, over the course of the story, you'll see the story through the eyes of one of the cops, and that'll be your main character. And usually the influence character or the obstacle character will be this other cop, if they're paired up. And so that's the relationship story. That's the heart. That's where you get into what's the story, what's the writer of the story trying to say emotionally. Um, so there's the head and the heart. Um, the subjective story is more like, what does this story mean emotionally? How do we apply that to our lives? Like, faith really does win out in the end, or something. That's more like the subjective story. That's the relationship story, the heart. And the crook, the catching the crook. If you act chaotic, right? If you act chaotic, you can be able to outsmart the crook. That's the head. That's the more the objective story. So, so you have the main. Was I talking about the main character, steadfast, and the influence character would have to be change. So right. So over the course of the story, at the climax, over time, if the main character remains objective, if the main character remains steadfast, the impact character, the influence character, must change. One character remains steadfast, one character changes. And so, likewise, if the main character changes, as in usually in Western films, they're looking for that moment at the end when the wow, the lighting is really weird. It's dark. Sorry about that. The Usually in Western stories, the audiences are looking for that that change moment right at the end. So at the end, if the main character changes and takes this alternative course, this alternative approach that the impact character has influenced upon him, he could either have a successful resolution to his personal problems, or think in retrospect think, why did I change? I was on the right track. I was really on the right track. And then I listened to this guy, and I was convinced. I was persuaded. I thought I thought his help, I thought his approach would help me. But now I'm in a worse state. I'm still back where I was. And my problems still occur. My problem still exists. And so that's the main character. How do I explain this? All right, let me explain. You have another quad. So you have that quad when you're assigning the what I'll call the through lines, the arcs, like the objective story, the main character, the impact character, and the subjective story. Those are all perspective through lines. And now you have what in Dramatica is 4 levels. This is what I mentioned before, what's called the periodic table. At the very top, you have a grid of 4. You have this is kind of hard because I'll just say upper. It may be mirrored. I don't know how this is going to come out in the camera, but in the upper left is a state, and in the lower right is a state. And so you can see diagonal. Take out a sheet of paper. It would be really easy. Take out a sheet of paper and draw out a grid, a quad for a unit in the upper left, unit in the upper right, lower left, lower right. Now the upper left is a state, and the lower right is a state. The upper right is a process, and the lower left, yes, the lower left is a process. Now, states, by definition, are you're stuck in, and process is the nature of the problem, because at each level, this is dealing with what's the problem, what's the source of the problem. So those two states refer to things that are stuck being the problem. What's the nature of the problem? And the two processes are the conflict lies in a kind of process that's ongoing. Here, let me give you a good example. Luke Skywalker is stuck. He's stuck on a planet. He wants to go out to space. That's his problem. His father was a Jedi, but he doesn't know very much about his father. So he's in a state, specifically in the upper state. Now, I should say, you have a state and a process, and you have a state and a process. Now, the two upper states refer to external problems, and the two lower ones refer to internal problems. So, Luke Skywalker is definitely a doer. His problem is that he's stuck physically on a planet. Unless his family dies, he's not getting off that planet. So he's stuck in an external state. Now, the counterpart to that in the psychological realm, in the internal realm, is the mind. You could be stuck in a mindset. That would be bigotry. That would be racism. It's not a process. It's the nature of your problem, or the nature of the problem involving you, is that you're stuck in this mindset. And once that mindset becomes unstuck, the problem is solved. Once Luke Skywalker goes from being a farm boy to being a Jedi, the problem, although that sounds more like a process, doesn't it? I'll have to get back to sorry. But once he gets, one of the earlier problems he has is getting off the planet. Once he gets off that planet, that part of his problem has been resolved. Now, Obi-Wan, as I said before, the main character and the influence character must occupy diagonal positions on this grid I'm talking about. So if we place Luke Skywalker in external state, Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Ben Kenobi, his influence character, must occupy that static mindset. And that doesn't mean that he's bigoted. That doesn't mean there's necessarily a problem. It's more like because Ben Kenobi is stuck in this physical mind. Because Ben Kenobi is stuck in this mindset, he can be able to influence Luke Skywalker to change. He's a great believer in the Force. It's almost like a panacea. The Force can do anything. So that leaves the two processes, right? You have an external process and an internal process. The external process has been nicknamed physics. The internal process has been nicknamed psychology. If you look at it on the older version of the periodic table, sometimes the terminology, especially at this top level, changes, but the meaning behind it, the point of it, what it actually is, what it represents, hasn't changed since they developed in the early 90s. They just changed it because, I guess, I don't know, some people new to it, they see the term psychology and I guess maybe they don't know how to deal with psychology, or so they change. What's weird? They changed psychology, which is the original term, to manipulation, because in a lot of movies they were analyzing, they saw a lot of manipulation, and it's true. Manipulation does involve psychology. It's one of the examples of a conflict within psychology, but that doesn't mean that um, manipulation is psychology. Like we can label that unit as manipulation because there are other possible conflicts. So, and plus it just fits well. So that mind where I place Ben Kenobi. Oh, I'm sorry. That's mind, and then adjacent to it, as you'd expect, would be psychology. It's psychology is literally the process of the mind being altered or being changed over the course of time under other influences. The same way that physics, that external process is universe, which is that the static the static external state is labeled universe, and so physics is literally a process of altering the physical state of the universe. It's literally what it is. Um, you have. I thought there was something out the window. Um, so, so you have Luke Skywalker in an external state, and you have Obi-Wan Kenobi in an internal state, mind. Um, and it's determined. Luke Skywalker. I guess that's self-explanatory. Luke Skywalker is a doer. As I mentioned before, you have doers and beers. A doer must occupy one of those two upper units, and a beer must occupy one of the two lower units. So Luke Skywalker is definitely a doer. If you see the movie, he tests the situations. He acts again. He pushes against the outside. He sees the problem. He sees the source of problems out there in the world, and he prefers to change the outside world rather than adapt to it. So, so he's in one of these, and we've determined that he's in external state, which would be universe, and so consequently, Obi-Wan Kenobi would be in an internal mind, internal state, which would be mind, and so. So you also have a relationship between the main character and the objective story through line. Now, the objective storyline could be here or it could be here. That's where remember I said four at the beginning. There are four main character traits of the main character, and there are four traits of the objective story. One of the traits, the other trait of the main character is I can't think of the term. It deals with yes. Whether you have to move up and work up to be able to change the problem, or do you have to stop it? I mean, do you have to here? Do you have to stop something from happening? It's either start or stop. Sorry, it's been a while since I've been dealing with this. It's become so second nature. I forget the terminology, but it's either start or stop. Now, a relationship between the objective story and the main character, if they're side by side like this, not like this, but side by side like this, it's a stop story. Now, the stop could be this next part depends on whether the main character changes or remains steadfast. If it's like this, if the main character changes, then the stop applies to himself. That means that there's some trait that he must stop in order to resolve his personal problem. Now, if he's steadfast, stop then applies to the objective story. He's holding out, right? He's waiting for the conflict in the objectives. He's waiting for something to stop happening. Let me give you some good examples, right? So, let me give you some good examples. As a writer, a story writer, if you're holding out, you know success is along the way. You're steadfast in establishing this career for yourself as a professional writer. But you have to hold out and wait. Actually, that's a good example of a start. Sorry. But it's still, right. Here, you're waiting, you're holding on until your success in the objective story, in the external world, starts happening. Let's say, it's the first example that comes to mind, sorry. If you're a very mean-spirited person, if you're, say, I can't remember whether Scrooge was a mean-spirited person, was a start, like which part he occupied in the grid. Let's say you're a very mean person, you bully other kids and so forth, and it's causing yourself personal problems. Now, this, in terms of it being a stop story, it wouldn't be a start story because you can't hold out and wait until you start being nicer. It's not like, it's kind of like an impression. You get an impression watching a story. When you start analyzing, you pick up. The emphasis is not so much on you starting to be a nicer person. It's more like it's waiting for you to stop being a mean person. And I like to see, here's a good way of that I use to help remember which one start, which one stop. The main character in the objective story, it's butting heads. Something has to give way. Something has to stop. Now, if one's below the other, well, yeah, if one's, because you could have the main character down here and the objective story up here. Usually, that's true in a lot of cases, especially Western stories. Something has to start, and it has to start happening. Like you're rising up. Something has to rise up and start happening, and it's building up, as opposed to conflict, direct conflict. Something has to give way and stop. I hope that helps. So I've explained the top part of the quad, and this works in fours. Now there's a lot more that I would need to get into, and I'll get into that. My voice is running. You may have noticed, what time is it? Oh, it's almost 1. It's 44 minutes. Boy, I've been talking quite a while. So it works in fours. Not only this way as a grid, but also this way. So you have 4 levels. The top level in the grid is most noticeable in the genre of the story. The next level is most noticeable in the plot, and beneath that is noticeable in the theme, and the bottom level, the element level, is most noticeable in the characters and events, specific events that happen. Now, so every time you go down a level, um, each unit, below each unit is another quad, and then another quad. So you start off at 4 at the top, and then down each unit, below each unit, there's a quad of 4, and then below each unit there is a quad of 4. And it's kind of like, if you look at the periodic table in 3 dimensions, if you think about it in 3 dimensions, it's like they merge as you go down. It's like a straw. They merge as you go down. So let's take the plot, for example. That's most noticeable in terms. Okay, so the top is most noticeable in terms of genre, and most noticeable in terms of the positioning, where the through lines are placed throughout the course of the story. They stay static through the course of the story where they're placed. And then as you go down to the next level, the plot level, you see that mainly in the objective, what the goal is. Because a main character, in some sense, a main character would have a goal for himself, like a personal concern. In Dramatica, they actually call it a concern. They don't call it goal. A concern. So there's a concern that each through line is concerned about over the course of the story. So that's the concern level. Now the objectives. Okay, so under universe, you have 4 concerns. Again, it's a grid beneath universe. In the upper, position means everything in this periodic table. You have past in the upper left. Here's a good time. If you haven't already, get a sheet of paper and sketch this out. You might see what I mean by them being relational to each other. Under universe, the next quad, the upper left is past. I know it's like the back of my hand. The upper left is past. The upper right is progress, meaning how much progress has occurred. It's all time related. This unit of universe. Upper left. Lower right is future. Oh, is it future? No. Sorry. It's below past. So you have past, and right below past is future. Over here, and again, it could be reversed. It depending on the camera, the way the camera reads this. But the upper left, past. Lower left is future. Upper right is progress, and lower right is present. So now you take that universe. That's beneath universe. Excuse me. Now directly diagonal to universe is physics. Oh no, sorry. No, sorry. This is an easier way. Directly across from physics, from universe, is physics. This is really hard to explain in a video. You have that same grid, but you don't have past, present, future, progress, present. You have under physics, you have the upper left. You have let me see. You have understanding. Then in the lower right, you have learning. The upper right, you have doing, and the lower left, you have obtaining. And you'll notice that past. This will be important soon. Past and understanding occupy the same positions within their relative quads. Now let's get to mind. That's directly diagonal to universe. In mind, you have in the upper left, you have memory. The lower right, you have contemplation, like considering things in a present state of, in the present, considering, contemplating. Um, and the and directly below memory is subconscious fears and desires. Internally, what are your subconscious fears and wants and desires? Now, directly diagonal to that, directly adjacent to memory is I was trying to think preconscious. And these are the impulsive reactions. In fact, in the newer terminology, they changed preconscious to impulsive responses. But it's the same thing. So you have you have memory, you have conscious consideration, you have subconscious fears and dreams and hopes and so forth, and then up here preconscious responses. They're like instinctive. They're not in the subconscious. They're not really that thought out. They're at that level between conscious and subconscious. It's like addictions. Like you smoke because you're addicted to it. You react. It's instinctive reactions. Impulsive. Or you could be very impulsive. And that tends to be momentary. So you can see past. Sorry. So let's look at for example, mind and universe. What I like to say is past in universe is to past is to physics as memory is to mind. You can see how they both compare. And believe it or not, future is to universe as obtaining is to physics, and as subconscious is to psychology. Mind. Subconscious is to mind. Incidentally, in psychology, I'll give you the ones in psychology. The one in the past location within psychology, if I have this right, being and becoming, and is conceptualization. And then the one occupying what's in the present in the other one of the other quads, the present and the conscious and so forth, that's conceiving. So you have conceptualization, you have conceiving. Now they sound very much alike. Conceptualization is more thought out. It's more like understanding, which also occupies that spot in physics. So where you see in physics, you see understanding. In psychology, you see conceptualization. Likewise, where you see learning in physics, in psychology, you see conceiving. So you can conceptualize a whole world. You can conceptualize the way a whole system works. Conceiving is more like you conceive an idea to do something. And then it's like an instant, a moment, like you conceive an idea. Oh yeah, that could work. You conceive a quick, simple version of an idea. Like, I think I'll go to school today. Yeah, here we go. Here's an off-the-cuff example. Conceive an idea. I think I'll go to school. I think I'll go to the grocery store. That's an excellent idea, excellent example. I think I'll conceive. I think I'll go to the grocery store. Now, conceptualization gets into the whole thing. What are you going to buy? Where are the different food items you need to buy? What's the map of the store look like? so forth. I hope you can see the difference. And then the other units in the diagonal. So that's one diagonal within psychology. The other diagonal within psychology is being and becoming. The upper, whichever one is in the upper right unit is being, and in the lower left is becoming. Now, some people who know Spanish might pick up on this. I took French, language of love. I took French, but I understood this pretty well. Being is, they've nicknamed being as playing a role. You're taking on a persona. It's not your true person. You're taking on, you're an actor playing a part. Becoming is more like transformation. It's a metamorphosis. You're becoming, it doesn't have to be physical, but you're becoming something that you weren't before. Like, good example. Here's an excellent example. You're training to be a police officer. And you start off a civilian. And at the end of the story, you're a police officer. Now you've become a police officer. It's not, you're not, unless you go to a Halloween party or something, you've become a permanent state of being a police officer, becoming a police officer. Now, Halloween, for example, yeah, I mentioned Halloween. Halloween is a good example of being. You could be a role model. You could be a cheerleader. Well, it's kind of confusing. You could be, you play a role. You be a mentor. Let me see. You could be a bully. You could be a nerd. Well, no, that gets more into becoming if you change. I hope you get the example. I hope you get the gist. Playing a role, it's a transitory, it's not a fixed state. It's like, oh, I'm playing this role now. I could change and play some other role. It's not who you really are, as opposed to becoming. Let me see. So then, okay, so to be brief about it, so each one of those units, I think it'd be 16 units altogether, but really it's 4 beneath each one above the top 4. So you take each unit there, and then the next level down, that has 4 units beneath that. And that has, so eventually you get 4 levels, and within that, within each level, you get either, at the top, you have a quad of 4, or you get 4 groups, or you get groups of 4. I'll have to explain. I intended to explain this further in a longer documentary video. My voice is going. So let me explain. One thing I should explain is that even though the main character could change or could stay steadfast, that has nothing to do with the outcome of the story. So let me explain I've explained the 4 main character traits. Now I'll explain the 4 objective story traits. Easy one, of course, at the end, is the objective story, not the main character's problem, but the objective story. Has that been resolved successfully? Is it a success or is it failure? Now, you may feel awkward, you may feel angry that the objective story was a success. Remember, this is objective story. This is purely like Empire versus Rebellion. This doesn't have so much your own personal opinions or feelings in it. It does have some. I mean, after all, you're a writer, and you're communicating feelings and so forth to the audience through this. But it's not so much a feeling, I guess, as the subjective story. What I'm saying is, you may want basically what I'm saying is, you may feel good that the objective goal in the story um, has been here has failed. For example, we may be following, let's say, a main character, right? And I should say that a main character and protagonist are not necessarily the same thing. Although in a lot of, I'd say probably most movies, the main character and the protagonist are the same, just to make things easy. And so we can follow both the main character's through line and the objective story through line to make it easy. But they're not always the same. Like, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird. We see through the story through the eyes of Scout. It's amazing. I remember her name. Through the eyes of Scout. She's our main character. But if you think about the courtroom, what's going on objectively, what's all the characters involved with, concerned about? I can't remember. It was a court trial. I don't remember exactly. Boo Radley and so forth. I don't remember what happened. But there's it's a racial courtroom trial, if I remember correctly. That's the objective story. And that's the objective story. And in that case, Scout's father is the protagonist, because the protagonist is defined as the one pursuing the goal. Now, we get back to the example of when it could be good that we're rooting for the main character and we want the objective story, we want the protagonist to fail. It could be that the main character is trying to escape the law because of some noble thing, probably, that we can identify with. That's a little too much. Now, this is where it gets tricky. Even I sometimes wonder who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist. The protagonist, by definition, is pursuing the story goal. That gets into what the story goal actually is. Now, if the story goal is for the escape crook to successfully successfully make it out and be free, you could write the story so that the story goal is, we want to see the main character, or this character playing dual roles. Main character could be main character and protagonist. Run free, escape, and be outside the law. And so that would then, by definition, that would make the person. This is where it gets common. Okay, follow. This is where the cop who's chasing the protagonist, the antagonist. Now, I said before, by definition, the protagonist pursues, the antagonist either avoids, or a weaker form of avoids is not distract. Is it distracts? Avoids or prevents. The stronger version would be prevents. A weaker version would be avoids. Now, so the main character, the goal of the story would be to see the main character escape. And so if the goal is to have the main character escape, then the antagonist is trying to prevent the protagonist from escaping. We could see it the other way. We could see the main goal being to capture the crook. The main character could be the crook, and we're following. We could follow the crook as the main character. However, the main character would be the antagonist. He's avoiding, he's escaping, and the goal of the story would be for the police officer to capture the crook. and we want, if we're the main character, we'd probably be rooting for the main character. We're seeing the story through the main character's eyes. So we want the objective story to fail. We want the objective story to. So what probably happened would be the objective story would fail. The protagonist, the cop chasing the antagonist, who's us, would fail and wouldn't be able to pursue. Let me now get into another quad. Remember, Dramatica works in quads. So you have the protagonist and the antagonist in diagonal relationship to each other. You have a contagonist. This is very interesting. You have a contagonist and a guardian character. Now, this is where the two co-founders of the theory discovered something. They were looking at Star Wars. They looked at Star Wars. In their book, which is free online, by the way, at Dramatica.com. They're not paying me for this, so free plug. In their book, thick book, online for free, hint, hint, hint. Pretty straightforwardly explained. They applied this theory and explained how it relates to Jaws, to Gone with the Wind, I believe, Gone with the Wind, and certainly to Star Wars. And you can see definitely in Jaws, for example, what's his name? The main character, the police officer, is the one who is pursuing. Let's get that shark. Let's get that shark. Now the shark would be, I guess in this case, the antagonist. Now, let me jump over a moment to Star Wars. In Star Wars, the two co-founders of the theory initially thought, well, Luke Skywalker is obviously the protagonist, and Darth Vader is the antagonist, because Darth Vader is the one most prominent. And you think of Star Wars, you think of problems occurring, you think of Darth Vader, right? He has this cool-looking mask, but actually, the Empire. They determined the Empire was the actual antagonist, and I would say not only the Empire. Sorry, I would say Governor Tarkin is the true antagonist. Pay attention to it. This is one of those pet peeves of mine. Pay attention to it. Although Darth Vader is the first character you see, whoops, did a sex change there. He questions Princess Leia when upon first meeting, but later on, the first change. That's something I would get into later. The drivers, what drives the story? Is it action or is it decision? One follows the other. Clearly in this story, action drives the story at critical moments in the story, particularly the 4 points. Essentially what some people would call acts. At the end of Act 1, Luke Skywalker comes back and discovers his aunt and uncle have been killed. Spoiler alert. Was that? Yeah. And that's an example of a test. The problem, the main character, if the main character is a change main character, he will share his personal problem with that of the objective story. So in this, Luke Skywalker's problem is test. He's constantly testing himself, testing his abilities and so forth. And the objective story, the Empire is testing what they can get away with. At the very beginning, they illegally capture the spacecraft that Princess Leia is in. They're testing what they can get away with. And then when we see Luke's aunt and uncle killed, we see again what the empire is testing, what they can get away with. Remember, this is a tyrannical, like fascist, Nazi-like regime. They're testing what they can get away with. Um, so then that begins Act Two, and so each act, if it's the driver at the beginning, if the inciting incident, namely in this case, Darth Vader capturing Princess Leia's ship, if that is an action, then the even though there are decisions, at each like quarter point in the story, there would be a significant action that drives the story in a new direction. And so then at the end of the story must be an action. And in the case of Luke Skywalker, it's definitely an action. He blows up the Death Star. That solves everything. Or at least for that story until The Empire Strikes Back comes along. So where were we? Let me see. Darth Driver. So you can see if you pay attention, there's a briefing room scene somewhere within Act One, and you see Governor Tarkin. Even though Darth Vader is there and a very intimidating presence, I mean that's the scene where you see him using the Force to choke out a fellow officer. And what was that line he says? I can't offhand. It's funny offhand. I can't remember the line. Anyway, something like I believe your faith. Something about faith. And then Governor Tarkin says, "Enough. Release him, Vader." And he says, "As you wish." And I've been watching movie reactions. It's really cool. I've been watching movie reactions by younger people who haven't on YouTube who haven't seen the movies, the trilogy when they came out. And they keep thinking, why is Darth Vader listening to this old man? Always, he's an old man. Old men are obviously hidden, and people don't pay attention to old people. So why is this? And even when they see Empire Strikes Back, they're surprised. They see, spoiler alert, for a movie that's like 40, 50 years old, something like that, about 40-something years old, they see Darth Vader kneeling before a hologram of the Emperor. And they're surprised, and they think, oh, there's somebody above Darth Vader? And that's usually their first wake-up moment. But if you pay attention, if you pay attention in Star Wars, in the first movie, Governor Tarkin refers to the Emperor. I think it's only once, but he refers to the Emperor. In that very same scene at the beginning, as he walks in, he says, the Emperor has gotten rid of the Senate, which is the last vestige of, he says, the vestiges of the old Republic have been swept away. So the Emperor, we do know about the Emperor if we pay attention. But anyway, in this story, Governor Tarkin calls all the shots for the Empire. He says Vader. When Princess Leia comes in, she meets Governor Tarkin, and she says, as a matter of fact, she says, Governor Tarkin, a very, very British accent. She says, Governor Tarkin, I would expect you to be holding Vader's leash. It's like it's hitting you over the head. And he makes a decision, not Darth Vader, but he makes the decision. He pushes, he interrogates her. Where is the rebel base, which ties into the goal of the story? Where is the rebel base? And he gives the command order to blow up her home planet. And later on, when it comes time to mention that there was a homing beacon that was placed on the Millennium Falcon, He's the one that says, "I hope you're right, Vader. I'm taking an awful risk. I hope you're right." And that segues me to Darth Vader's role in the story. He's not protagonist. Because he's not pursuing the story goal of blowing up the Death Star. He's um, he's the contagonist. He's not the antagonist. He's the contagonist. The contagonist is defined. Each of these roles is defined by two traits. I've already said the protagonist pursues and persuades. He's persuading people that we need to pursue the goal, and he pursues the story goal. The antagonist prevents the protagonist, prevents the story goal from being achieved, and he tries to persuade I shouldn't say persuade, the opposite. I can't remember what the opposite of persuade is, but he persuades people, he dissuades. Now we get to the contagonist. The contagonist is temptation and hinder. And in both, Darth Vader certainly does both. He screws things up. He hinders the Empire's efforts in certain ways if you look at the story, and he also hinders the rebels. Temptation plays a big part with Darth Vader. First of all, he himself has been tempted by the dark side, as Obi-Wan Kenobi says, he's been tempted by the dark side of the Force. I think that's a direct quote. And he also tempts, I can't remember specific examples, but he also tempts other characters as well. And of course, through the course of the original trilogy, and also in the prequel trilogy, we see just how much he was tempted by the dark side of the Force. And so he's the contagonist, temptation and hinder. Now, we see the protagonist and the antagonist. They have a diagonal relationship. We have a contagonist who is who is the counterpart. Well, there's Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's the guardian character. He's the guardian character. As the guardian character, he's both help, which help is opposite of hinder. You see all these elements on the bottom, the element level at the very bottom of that 4-level periodic table. See, it all fits together. It's just it takes a lot of effort to explain it, but after a while, it all becomes second nature. You can see how it all fits together. You develop a holistic mindset about this. Incidentally, they're still trying to figure out the entire theory. They have this static view. Their theory can predict the static nature of things in the story. In other words, whether the protagonist is this way or this way, whether the story goal is achieved or not, that's static. But the holistic, that's tricky, and they're working on it. It would say it's probably more like waveforms. It's like amplitude and frequency. It's more like how much does the protagonist pursue at each course in the story. In other words, if you had the total theory, if you had the program, the software geared up to be able to do both sides, both the static and the linear, the static and the holistic, the program could be able to identify whether the protagonist at each point in the story, for example, whether the character is changing his attitude, changing his resolve, and whether and by how much. So anyway, so back to the guardian character. The guardian character has this trait of help, which is directly opposite of hinder. And he also has conscience, which is directly opposite from temptation. So it's also interesting that, let me get to that in a moment. So the him helping, he gives Luke Skywalker his father's lightsaber. He helps. He trains him in the Force. That's certainly helping, and so forth. Now, conscience. He is consciously arguing why the story goal is important. If you notice later on, as happens surprisingly sometimes in these stories, the guardian character, just like the protagonist and the antagonist, many times will be in a scene where they're in conflict. You see Obi-Wan Kenobi, not Luke Skywalker, but Obi-Wan Kenobi confronting Darth Vader, and they have a past history together. He also helps when he goes like this and vanishes and becomes part of the Force, and Darth Vader goes like that. He's literally helping Luke escape. So you have the protagonist, and then there are four other characters. I'll leave them aside. They're the sidekick, the skeptic, emotional and rational, or feeling and emotion, feeling and logic, something like that. Let me get back to the four objective story traits. So you have whether the story concludes successfully or ends up a failure, the objective story. You have whether the main character has resolved his problem or not. Generally, at the end of the story, has the main character gone, does the main character feel at peace? Has he seemed like he resolved his there's no conflict going on, he's happy, he's at least content. Or is he still troubled? And then there's another trait, so that's objective story, has it been successful? Has the main character resolved his personal his personal dilemma? Is the objective, how does the objective story get towards the climax? It's not the end. There are two things. There's one that relates to the end of the story, the final action in the story, and then there's another trait that relates to the progress towards that final point. Now, I've already mentioned this before. It's the driver. The driver could be either decision or action. So I've already explained that. And the fact that in the climactic final moment, in the climax, there must be a decision or an action taken. And if there's a decision, then at each critical point earlier in the story, there should be a critical decision that changes the course of the story. Likewise, my nose itches. If there's an action, then there would be crucial actions taken that take the story in a new direction. So to get there, it's either a space lock. This is the lock. The story is either locked in terms of time or in terms of space. Now this is like holistic and linear, very much like holistic and linear for the main character. Remember I said the main character, we identify, we as the audience, we can identify the main character as thinking through, like contemplating in a linear fashion, like piecing things together, trying to understand in a linear fashion, point to point to point to point, or holistically, understanding how these things all interrelate. Now, this I've read that this is controversial, but remember I said linear tends to be a male. I may have said this before. I'm saying it now. Males tend to be linear and think linearly, and females tend to think holistically. So if you if you want to write a chick flick, you will. Well, I'll get to that in a moment. But this relates to chick flicks and what would be the equivalent of a chick flick for a man? Testosterone flick. I guess I'll go with testosterone flick. Okay, so so how is the story locked? Is it locked by time or is it locked by space? Usually, if it's locked by space, it could be geographic. In other words, if the characters have to get to a certain destination, they have to go through a certain number of cities or destination, certain number of places to get to that final destination. And that would be identified, or at least very obvious to the audience. What if it's an objective? If it's a space lock, the different or option lock. That's it, right? It's called an option lock, but it deals with space. What the different options are at pretty much basically at the beginning of the story. So that way, over the course of the story, you can count off, you can check mark off. Okay, you have this list. They don't necessarily go in order, but you have to accomplish this, and this has to be done, this has to be done, and this has to be done before you can get to the climax. And not necessarily in this order, but this has to be checked off, and this has to be checked off, and this has to be dealt with, and this has to be dealt with. And then you can get, and then the audience, in their minds, the audience is keeping track of this. Okay, that's been done, that's been done, it's like a treasure hunt. Treasure hunt is a good example of an option lock. The ultimate goal, the climax, would be like maybe the final thing in the treasure hunt. But you can keep track of how close you are. Like the audience can keep track of how close they're getting towards the climax by how many things have been found in the treasure hunt. And there's more thinking in that. The time lock is pretty self-explanatory. The time lock is just a matter of time. It's not like the option lock where things can be rearranged and so forth. A time lock is you've got 48 hours to solve the crime. And there's a big difference. Okay, be careful, because sometimes I've seen this in they post analyses. If you want to see an analysis, if you want good education, do what I did. Listen to, and you can even watch on YouTube. Search through for Dramatica, like Dramatica Ghostbusters, Dramatica. Go to the Dramatica site, Dramatica.com, and you'll see what movies they've analyzed. And a lot of movies they've analyzed, there's also an audio recording of it in wherever you can find podcasts, wherever you find good podcasts, you'll be able to see it. You should be able to find it. And YouTube. There's a channel. As a matter of fact, there's a channel run by Jim Hull. Might as well give his name. He's the guy who ran the blog that I mentioned earlier in the story. That's how I discovered Dramatica, through his blog. So he has this channel, and unfortunately there are a lot of people with Jim. There are quite a few people with Jim Hall as their name apparently on YouTube. But he's the one where it's a circle cut up into quadrants, obviously for Dramatica, because Dramatica works on the theory of the quad. And there's a whole. I'm barely scratching the surface of the theory. It's a whole, and I do mean theory, because a theory is testable. They apply the software. They have the software calculate and predict what's going to happen. And then they watch, sorry, strike that, reverse it, reverse it. They watch the movie first, and so they can get a sense, okay, this is the story, this is what we've been presented, or in other words, maybe likewise, like this is the story we want to tell. Then they start plugging in the things, and it's dynamic. You start plugging in, making choices, this or this, and choosing in the Dramatica software. And as it's dramatic, so I'm sorry, dynamic. So as you're modifying it from like a blank slate, it's making logical deductions. Like, well, if you have this set here, the only possible choice over here is this, and then the only possible choice over here is this, and it starts calculating until you're getting to one story form, and that's the way. So, all right. So let me get back to what I was talking about. So they have these sessions where they watch the film, and then they identify who's the main character and what's his problem and stuff like that. What's the objective story, and is the main character linear or holistic, stuff like that. And so they figure that out, and then they put that into the program. And as they're putting it into the program, the software, it's calculating, it's deducing and eliminating all non-possible options. And then hopefully you're left with not many more possible permutations or story forms. It's funny, when they were analyzing the movie The Queen, during the analysis session afterwards, after they saw the movie, they were trying to figure out, okay, is this, as a matter of fact, it was that lock I was talking about, story lock. Is it an option lock or is it a time lock? Time kept coming up. It kept mentioning, okay, Tuesday, no, whatever the date was. A calendar date kept showing up. And so that made some part of the audience, some part of this analysis group think, oh, it's a time lock. I kept seeing time moving forward until the Queen gave her speech and responded to the protesters who were insisting, they were insisting that the Queen give some kind of reaction, positive or negative, just react publicly to Princess Diana's death. So you'd see the calendar dates appear. And I saw that. I didn't think that was really, that's not a time lock. A true time lock is where it's fixed. You cannot change this. It must be, the climax, the goal must be accomplished within 48 hours. A lot of sports games are time locks. Baseball is not a time lock. It's an option lock. And that's maybe the only example of an option lock. I was trying to think of other ones. That may be the only option lock. Because you have so many things like so many outs, it's not timed. It's there's no time involved. If you get 3 strikes, you're out, and then you get 3 outs, stuff like that, ball and so forth. So it works dynamically. It's like works its way out. It's not like a clock. You hit a clock, you start the timer, and it goes, and you better accomplish it by the point the timer runs out. Somebody even pointed out that actually, if you take a sand, what was it? An old sand, one of those where you have sand at one end and then you flip it over, a sand clock. You flip it over and the sand slowly drains. You might first think that's a time lock, right? But no, I mean, you can easily shift it. You can shake it around so that you can get you can quicken the pace of how much sand gets into one end of it or the other. In other words, you can alter how quickly time. Once you can alter how quickly time is elapsing towards the goal, it's not a time lock. May not even be an option lock. Usually, if it's not one, it's the other. in a poorly written story, you may find there is no lock, and I somebody can probably name in the comments if you see an example that seems to be neither a time lock nor an option lock, because I bet you somewhere something's been written, some movie's been made where you're thinking, God, when is this going to end? I don't see any direction where this is headed. And that's the point of the lock. You feel a sense of exhilaration. You feel a sense that it's heading towards, it's a sense of direction. You're heading towards a climax. Now let me see. Where are we? Wow, 100, an hour and 35 minutes. This will be like 100, I'm sorry, I got 100 in my mind. We're moving towards like an hour and 45 minutes here. Wow, this is great. And I've been talking that long. Holy cow. Maintaining myself. Wow. So anyway, holistically, right. Okay, so a story can be like the main character can think linearly or holistically, male, masculine, male or female. The objective story can move along either linearly, time being linear, or space option-wise, which would be more related to space and holistically. In other words, the relationship amongst different parts. So let me get back to my chick flick and testosterone blockbuster. So if you want to, a very male testosterone, a very male movie, a movie that men can really, most men would really empathize with. Now there's empathy and there's sympathy. Both genders of audience can are capable of empathy and sympathy. A movie with a linear time lock, right? Say you have a movie with a linear. I'm sorry, I keep saying linear. With a time lock, it's very easy to follow. You got 48 hours. Very, very simple. And you have a main character that's linearly minded. The male members of the audience will go right in, and they'll empathize emotionally. They'll empathize. They'll feel like they're the main character, and they'll also identify. They'll understand very well the overall problem. There's a time lock. We've got 48 hours in order to do this. Come on, come on. And now you get what's okay. So let me get the opposite. Let me describe the chick flick. It'll turn a lot of men off. That's something actually interesting. And a strange quirk, actually. It's been said in Dramatica that women can understand something geared towards men better than, or say you have a, okay, I'll just leave it at, women can understand a linear storyline, a linear type of storyline, not a holistic one, better than men can place themselves into an option lock, a very chick flick option lock, spatially oriented, with a let's see, time, linear, and holistic, very holistic main character. Because remember, right, it's the main character we're seeing the story through. If you want to tick off male members of the audience, write a holistic main character. So right away, the female members of the audience will be right in tune, for the most part, be right in tune with this holistic mindset, and the male members of the audience who can't they can't lock on. They're so linear, they can't lock on. Um, and this is it. It's been said in Dramatica that the female members of the audience can understand both a holistic and they can grasp a linear, to some degree, they can grasp a linear mindset in the main character. Much better than a male member of the audience can grasp a holistic. It's like the difference between, like, here's a skew between a female audience trying to understand a linear character. Okay, um, actually, I should do this. Okay, a female audience member would probably, to some degree, understand a linear main character. This is more like how a linear audience, a male audience thinking linear, for the most part, stereotypically thinking linearly, would get into the mindset of a holistic main character. There's a difference there. Um, so that's how you get the chick flick. That's how you get a lot of. That's how you get, like, excuse the fans of Twilight, but that's how you get the male members of the audience saying, "Well, for Pete's sake, get on with it. Like, solve your problem and get on with it." Because a male audience would think in terms of that's interesting. That's been developed in Dramatica by Jim Hall as an outgrowth of Dramatica. It was part of Dramatica, but they actually, the developers of it actually dumbed it down, unfortunately. But Jim Hall, on his website, his project Subtext, his project is adapting the theory of Dramatica specifically to screenwriters and to story creators. So he's a fan, as I am. He's a fan of that earlier terminology that makes more sense. That's more intuitive. Um, so anyway, back to ticking off the was it back to ticking off the mailman? So chick flicks and so forth. So right. So the male members would be. Right. So the male mindset is more geared toward linear. Like, okay, you have a problem, you solve the problem. Whereas a female audience member, a female mindset is more like, I'm not in the present, or it thinks in terms of spatially, it thinks in terms of waves. I'm not feeling it right now, or how different things, like this part of my life is not making me feel happy. How do I make myself happy? What do I change to make myself feel happier or more content? Hope that doesn't tick. I hope that doesn't make female members of the audience watching this feel uncomfortable. I hope not. So the male, so male watching a chick flick will keep thinking, come on, just solve your freaking problem and get on with it. Whereas a chick, not just a female, not just a holistic mindset, whatever, but a chick flick, a holistic main character in an option lock story, will tend to dwell on, okay, I'm exploring this right now. How do I feel about that? Like, what am I thinking right now? I've got to explore this again. I'll go back to this. Now that this has changed, I want to go back to this and explore and look to see, are there any differences in this, and go back. And the guy is like thinking, you've gone through there already. Get on with it. Just find your freaking problem and get on with it. So I hope that explains difference, different in mindsets. Let me explain Wonder Woman, for example, the latest movie, Wonder Woman. I was curious because for what seems like decades, I guess, yeah, literally decades, they've been trying to write and make a Wonder Woman film. And so when it was, I guess it was Warner Brothers, no, not Warner, yeah, Warner Brothers, when they came out with Wonder Woman, as they were announcing, it was in the press and so forth. I was wondering, are they going to have Wonder Woman be a linear character or a holistic character? Now, if you, as I alluded to before, if you want to get the most number of people in the audience, if you want to appeal to the most number of demographics in the audience, you will have a linear main character, meaning the men can totally be empathetic and sympathetic, and the female members of the audience will tend to be not necessarily empathetic, but they can follow the sympathetic. They can understand the mindset of the linear main character. Now, it's probably, the objective story will probably be an option lock story. Usually they're option lock stories. Me personally, I get turned off by time lock stories. I mean, they're just so boring. Unless you tell the story really well or hide the fact that it's a time lock story, it gets really boring for me. I'm more of and for the majority, I think Western stories in general tend to have an option lock. Strangely enough, if I remember correctly, they found that the movie The American President has a time lock. However, because I think he's supposed to give an announcement before Congress at a certain time, and time is ticking away. However, they throw in a few option locks, or they throw in another option lock to not make it seem so linear. So obvious. So anyway, it's probably going to be I was figuring Wonder Woman would probably be an option lock story. So would they make Wonder Woman physically? This doesn't have any bearing on linear or holistic, male or female thinker. She's female, obviously, but is she going to be linear, which would mean that the female members of the audience will have a good chance of following following her in her story as the main character, and the male members would also be following, and that way you get the broadest demographic, the broadest number of people in the audience following the main character, following the story, and feeling. They can't quite articulate, unless they've studied Dramatica, they can't quite identify why the story didn't appeal to them, or why it did appeal to them. But that would be why. Or are they going to have her be holistic, which would make the male members think, okay, I'm watching this. The male members would think, okay, I'm watching this woman doing these things. I can't predict what the heck she's going to do next. And I hope the objective story is really good, because I'm losing interest in this story really fast. So guess what happened? They made her very linear. They made her, okay, in Dramatica, it's not necessarily a rule that if the main character is linear, for example, that the other character has to be holistic. I used to think this, that the other character has to be holistic. Many times it is, just for that contrast. Or if the main character is holistic, the influence character has to be linear. Many times it is. In this case, I could see ways in which obviously Wonder Woman was thinking very linearly. I mean, right at the outset, she says, I want to get to the finish line. Okay, tell me where the problem is. Tell me where this conflict is occurring. I want to go straight there, and I want to stop it. I want to take care of it. Take it. Destroy it. Destroy these forces of evil, or whatever. And many times you see Steve Trevor, the man, the leading man in her life, arguing what I would call the holistic point of view. Look, you've got to take into account this, and if you do this, then it has ramifications. Other things will happen. Now, since then, even though I've noticed a lot of times there is a contrast, linear and holistic, it doesn't have to be that way. And Jim Hall in his podcast, has somebody who has been doing writing sessions and explaining Dramatica, the theory, better to people, or at least the subtext take on Dramatica better to people. And he describes, it makes sense. He says, look, this is not an actual story. These events aren't actually going on. This is from the mind of one person. Now, the person could be thinking, have a male mindset or a female mindset. And the characters are all like, the characters are avatars. That's the best word. Characters are avatars acting, behaving, and so forth. The way, according to the mindset of the writer. I hope I'm not losing people. Remember, these characters don't really exist. They're like puppet, as the guy in subtext put it. They're puppets. It's really what you're seeing is a hand with a puppet on it. They aren't real people. Surprise, surprise, they aren't real people. They're following a script written by one writer. Well, a group of writers, but they're following one script. So it can be, and I wondered about this myself. In fact, I've argued with him at the beginning. I may still end up winning, but I mean, I guess he was pretty persuasive. I argued that Obi-Wan Kenobi seemed very holistic. He was talking about the Force, and you have to, and the way the Force works. It penetrates us. It surrounds us. And you can manipulate things just by, well, although that didn't happen in the first movie, it happened in the second movie. But although Darth Vader had his chokehold, so I guess it did introduce it a little bit. You can manipulate the outside world by squeezing space-time. I don't know exactly how the Force works, but because other than midi-chlorians, I don't know exactly how space-time would warp. I guess it would warp, so forth, if you get actual real-world physics into it. So, let's see. So I was arguing that Obi-Wan Kenobi was a holistic thinker, and Luke Skywalker was very much a linear thinker. I could tell that right away. It's pretty obvious. And then he argued, he gave good explanations as to Obi-Wan Kenobi thinking linearly. Well, if this happens, then this happens. Think this leads to this. If this happens, then this happens. Or if this doesn't happen, then this shouldn't happen. Even though he's a beer, he must, by definition, by the way the theory works, you have the 4 quadrants, he must be a beer because Luke Skywalker is a doer, occupying one of these upper ones. He must occupy one of these lower ones. They must be diagonally placed. And I could see he is a beer. So they had her be very linear, which allowed the male members of the audience and the female members of the audience to be able to follow along. And Steve Trevor gave good arguments. I would say sounded holistic. Now, this has been mentioned in X-Files. This might be a good example. In X-Files, they reversed it. They had Fox Mulder being the holistic type thinker. He thinks spatially, like he relies on instinct. In fact, when I was watching I should mention, so he's holistic, and then Dana Scully, she is linear. And what's amazing is that at the end of the first episode, of course, before I learned about Dramatica, when I was watching the first episode of the X-Files, he concluded something at the very end. He says, I think I know what happened, or he says, I know What happened? And then his explanation seemed like it came out of nowhere. And as a linear thinker, that jives with Dramatica. I had no idea. Like, in retrospect, I mean, when he explained it, oh yeah, I could see how it works. But it's like I was following in the mindset of Dana Scully. And that's the way linear and holistic thinkers operate. If you're watching a movie, if you're a guy and you're watching a movie and you can't get into the main character's shoes, chances are that person is a holistic thinker. And as a matter of fact, actually, there was a movie. Oh shucks, there's an old screwball comedy where the male members. It was the analysis session consisted of all men except for one woman. And they were trying to figure out a simple thing. Who's the main character in the story? I can't remember. It was a Cary Grant movie. And they all said Cary Grant because he's so dynamic and he's very active and he's very manipulative and he keeps talking and talking and talking and so forth. And they figured, oh, obviously he's the main character. He dominates the screen whenever he's he dominates whenever he's on screen. And the woman said in the audience, the analysis session group said, no, it's the woman. And if you look, and the moderator of the group, who is also incidentally one of the two co-founders, he pointed out, hey, he knew, of course, she's right. You missed all those examples of where you saw the main character in all these other aspects of the story, where the main you can't count the objective story parts and that was the part in terms of the crime itself. You can't count those parts because she may have been the protagonist. Or maybe there are several protagonists or several people pursuing the goal, something like that. You can't count that. But you see her with her ex-boyfriend, you see her with her fiancé, you see her talking about these other personal aspects of her life. And that's the main character. Remember, you're watching the movie through the main character's point of view. And this other character, who's the Cary Grant character, you learn about the main character through the main character. You learn about the impact character or the influence character through the main character's point of view. As the story progresses, you're in the shoes of the main character. If I said in the shoes, if you got my point yet? So they totally missed it right over their heads. Only the woman could identify with the woman in the main character in the story and follow along. So anyway, let me see. Is there something else? I think I've explained quite a bit. It's getting on to 2 minutes shy, a little less than 2 minutes shy of 2 hours. So I'm gonna cut it short, and I'm gonna pretty soon, hopefully, you'll see a documentary, a longer version of my explanation of Dramatica. All right, see you next time.